Hi everyone, I'm really excited to introduce you to my new book. This is The Pharaoh's Curse. It's the second in my Museum Kittens series and it's illustrated by the brilliant Sarah Lodge. This is Tasha, who's the main character, the main kitten telling the story in this book. And I really love Tasha because actually she reminds me of me. She's a great storyteller. And the reason she loves living at the museum is she's so excited to learn the stories behind all the different artefacts. I've always loved museums, so Museum Kittens for me is like a combination of my two favourite things, museums and cats. And this story, as you might have guessed from the title, The Pharaoh's Curse, is all about ancient Egypt. And I've actually been fascinated by Egypt since I was a child. One of my absolute favourite books was called The Usborne Time Traveller's Guide to Ancient Egypt. And the whole idea of the book was that you put on a magic time travelling helmet and you could go to all sorts of different periods of time. And the Egypt one was full of all these different weird, interesting facts about ancient Egypt. My absolute favourite page was a page about preparing for a party. And I was fascinated because in the illustrations it showed people putting special cones of incense on their heads, which would then melt throughout the party and sort of drip sweet smelling incense down all over their hair. And I thought that sounded amazing, but also really horrible at the same time. I couldn't imagine wanting to go to a party with incense dripping down all over your hair. And I really, really loved that book. And I've always been fascinated by the strange facts about ancient Egypt. So it was great having the chance to do lots of ancient Egyptian research while I was working on The Pharaoh's Curse. I thought I would read you a bit of the beginning of the book to give you a sense of what is going on. So at the very, very start, the kittens are really excited because a new exhibit arrives at the museum. It's part of the Book of the Dead. And that is an ancient book which is a set of instructions for people after they've died about how to navigate the afterlife. A lot of ancient Egyptian culture was focused on what happens after you die, and there were very complicated instructions for how you can best deal with being part of the afterlife. And the Book of the Dead is full of instructions and prayers and even some curses, and it's fascinating. And there are quite a few different copies of bits of it, and the exhibit in the museum is part of the Book of the Dead, but it's a part that no one's ever seen before, so it's really strange and special and rare. But lots of people are worried that actually the pharaoh whose tomb it came from is not happy that it's been taken away. And the kittens are starting to think that maybe there's a curse that's been brought with the papyrus into the museum. News of the special new exhibit in the Egyptian gallery began to spread around the museum, and so did rumours about the curse. The lorry that had brought the old artefacts to the museum had got 2 flat tyres and suffered a mysterious engine failure on the way, the cafe staff muttered. Then, the day after the papyrus arrived, one of the guards slipped over in the gallery and banged his head on the display case. He said he didn't know how he'd done it. He was fine one minute and on the floor the next. All the water pipes started to make strange whistling noises, and there were eerie shrieking sounds whenever anyone flushed the loo in the washrooms by the Egyptian gallery. The day after that, a school trip came to visit, and one of the children was sick all over the floor. The cleaners said there was definitely a curse. I told you, Peter whispered to Tasha, as they sat watching the others practice hunting one evening after the museum had closed. That papyrus is bad news. The pharaoh doesn't like it being here. Grandpa Ivan said no one knows where Tutmos I's mummy ended up, and I bet his ghost's furious. Something really awful's going to happen to the museum. No, it isn't, Tasha said, rolling her eyes. Is it my turn yet? She added, twitching her tail. But Boris was already creeping forwards in a hunting crouch. Very good, Grandpa Ivan growled. And wait and watch. Don't spring. I said don't spring, you ginger oaf. Boris tumbled head over heels and landed with a meaty thump. Then he glared at the others. Bianca was smirking, and he could tell Tasha and Peter were trying not to laugh. Peter's black muzzle was all wrinkled up with the strain of holding it in. "Are you all right, dear?" their mother Smoke murmured, nudging him gently. "Yes," Boris muttered as he stood up. Why did being the biggest and strongest of the kittens always mean that he was the clumsiest too? They were all supposed to be practicing their ratting skills so they could grow up to be museum guard cats, like their mother and their grandfather and all their aunts and uncles. Boris knew that one of these days he was going to be a mighty hunter. He just needed to grow into his paws first. "Have a rest, Boris," Smoke said. "Tasha, you try. Imagine a great grey rat sneaking along the edge of the wall. You spot him." Tasha tensed up, her ears pricking and her tail beginning to swish from side to side. Boris watched her slinking towards the imaginary rat and sighed. She looked so professional. At the moment, it seemed that the only way he'd ever catch a rat would be if he fell on top of it. Perhaps it was because he'd eaten so much supper, Boris thought sadly to himself. He was quite full. Maybe that's why he was so clumsy. He wished they didn't have to have lessons in the evenings, but Smoke and Grandpa Ivan wanted them to practice hunting in the galleries where there would be real guard cats one day. So that meant they had to wait until the visitors had left. Tasha prowled across the room, trying to imagine a rat, all sharp teeth and beady black eyes. Hunting imaginary rats was one thing, but the thought of facing off against a fully grown rat was terrifying. Boris said he'd seen rats that were twice her size. "Keep low," her mother called, and Tasha crouched down even further, paws trembling with the effort. Nicely done, Grandpa Ivan purred. "Very good form there, small grey stripy one." "She's Tasha." Smoke let out a sigh. "I know perfectly well who she is. Now back, as fast as you can." Tasha whirled round and shot across the gallery, claws scritching on the slippery floor. She just managed to skid to a stop before she crashed into the other kittens. Yes, well done." Grandpa nodded regally, and Tasha glowed. She wasn't used to being told she was good at things. She usually got told off for daydreaming during their hunting lessons. It was hard not to daydream when they were surrounded by so many beautiful things. Peter prowled across the gallery to take his turn, and Tasha sat down and started to lick her paws and swipe them across her ears. Then she looked sideways at the tall plinth towering over them all. The bronze statue of Bastet, the cat goddess, was one of her favourite museum treasures. It was more than 2,500 years old, but the cat goddess looked just like so many cats that Tasha knew. On her best, tidiest days, Tasha hoped that she looked a little like the statue too. She'd read the sign on the plinth, and she knew that Bastet was the Egyptian goddess of a great many things. Secrets and songs and protection and happiness, but mostly cats. "Thank you," Tasha whispered to the statue. "Did you help? I'm not usually very good at lessons." The bronze cat stared silently ahead, and her gold earrings glittered in the dim light. Tasha wished that she wasn't in a glass case. The cat was old and precious and delicate, Tasha knew that, but it would be so wonderful to nuzzle up against her just once. Tasha couldn't help feeling that Bastet's hard bronze skin would melt to soft tabby brown fur, and she'd nudge back. "You see? Look at that, Boris," Tasha heard Grandpa Ivan say sternly. "Perfect hunting from little black kitten I can never remember the name of. Practice! Practice! That's all it takes. Learn to control your paws." "Yes, Grandpa," Boris muttered, and Tasha gently brushed whiskers with him. She didn't think Boris had been that bad. "I'm always falling over my paws," she whispered to him. "I've never been so hopeless before." Boris heaved a sigh. "I reckon it's that horrible bit of paper. He glared at the papyrus in its glass case. "It's cursed, all right." "No, it isn't," Tasha hissed. But then her whiskers twitched worriedly. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Peter was marching proudly towards them across the gallery. But then his ears began to flatten back, and the fur stiffened up all along his spine. There was a strange creaking noise, and somehow Peter's shining black fur seemed to turn grey all at once. Tasha looked up slowly towards the ceiling and saw a great dark crack spread across the white plaster, branching out like the rivers on the map she'd studied in the map room. Dust shimmered down like a waterfall. "Run!" Boris yowled, and Peter scrambled out of the way just as the middle of the ceiling collapsed. Huge chunks of plaster crashed to the floor right where he'd been standing. "Peter!" Tasha mewed, nuzzling anxiously at him, and then she looked back at the gallery and whispered, "The treasures! Bastet's statue, the mummy cases, the papyrus!" "All of you out of here!" Smoke hissed, herding the kittens to the safety of the doorway. They scurried along in front of her, glancing back at the scene of devastation, but it was hard to see anything through the haze of dust. "Are you all right?" Boris asked Peter worriedly, as Bianca tried to groom the dust out of his black fur. He was a small, skinny grey kitten, instead of a small, skinny black kitten now. "There's no point licking him," Grandpa Ivan told her. "What he needs is a bath." Peter stared at Grandpa in horror, but the old white cat was already thinking about more important things. "Where's that caretaker when we want him?" he muttered. "Lazy so-and-so. He should have come running. Ah!" Grandpa Ivan's whiskers bristled, and the kittens looked round to see the old man hurrying through the Roman room. He was carrying a radio, gabbling into it as he ran. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the pile of plaster with eyes as round as marbles. "About time," Smoke muttered. "On your way, kittens. We don't want the old man thinking we've got anything to do with this." "He already does," Peter whispered back. "Look, he's glaring at us." The 3 other kittens peered round and saw that Peter was right. The elderly caretaker was eyeing the cats suspiciously. "How can he think we've broken the ceiling?" Boris asked indignantly. Then he scowled at Tasha and the others, who were looking at each other meaningfully. "That's not fair. I've never broken a ceiling. It was only one smallish sort of dinosaur, and we put it all back together before anybody noticed." So you'll have to read the rest of the book to see what happens and whether there really is a curse on the museum. But I really hope you enjoy reading it. I loved writing it so much, and I'm really looking forward to sharing it with everyone. Bye!